this is a time, I mean, when so many people are worrying about the future of work. Particularly, they're worrying about their children coming to the labor market. It feels like technology may be about to wipe out all the jobs that the middle classes have relied on for a long time. It feels like global competition is going to take away a lot of jobs from the rich countries, and in the services sector, just as happened in the manufacturing sector. It feels like the retirement system is broken, and so maybe all of us are going to have to work till we're 80 or 90. It just feels like a grim outlook. And a year ago at Buttonwood, we had a debate between Bob Shiller, who just won the Nobel Prize for Economics, and Vivek Wadhwa, who's at the Singularity University, on, if you had a young graduate coming to you from an Ivy League university, would you advise them to go and work on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley? And Silicon Valley won that contest pretty clearly. I want to ask each of our panelists just to kick us off with a very short thought now on if your 18-year-old comes to you and says, give me some career advice, what should I be thinking of doing at this point? What would your advice be? And I'm going to start with Di.
So first, I'd be so happy that my kids were only 18, right? I think we're living in a world where over the next 30 years, we're going to really have a bifurcation of jobs. So the first thing that I would ask them is, are they somewhat like their mom and a little analytical in approach? And the moment they hopefully said yes, I would say this is the environment to focus on predictive analytics. I think big data and analyzing analytics is absolutely the space that's going to explode over the next 30 years. Now, if they were, on the other hand, said, look, I'm more creative, or I want to work with my hands, and I'm not necessarily as analytical as mom, I would probably say, I'm almost indifferent in terms of what it is you do, but I want you to also have a specialization and focus on the changing demographics. And with the changing demographics, I want you to spend as much of your career as you can working with the baby boomers who will, alas, be living longer lives throughout retirement. So anything in geriatric care.
And in fact, this is what you advised your daughter.
Yeah, I actually made a deal with my daughter who's 32. I said, look, mom will pay for your master's, and she became a physical therapist, upon the condition that you get a specialization in geriatric care. So now she's utterly employable, which means mom might be able to retire a little bit earlier.
Rodney, what about you?
Well, my advice isn't that much different. I would say to the more analytic kid, make sure you learn to code, because I think learning to code is an entree into all sorts of things, understanding analytic thought. And again, for the ones who aren't that, I think the next 30 years of our economy is going to be dominated by this demographic flip, and people like me getting older, and so anything that can be involved in elder care is going to be employable and important.
James.
I think I'd say something slightly different. I'd say learn to learn, develop some analytical problem-solving skills, and go throw yourself in a very adaptive, innovative environment like Silicon Valley. You'll be fine.
Okay, well that's that sorted then. So, now James, it's a bit, I mean, we've got this great advice, but the reality is, I mean, you've written at length that, I mean, this next 20-year period, maybe 20 to 30-year period, looks to be maybe the most turbulent period in the history of work in terms of whole definitions of professions changing, what jobs there are and what jobs will be created, being radically different. I mean, tell us why that is.
Well, I think a few things are going on. First of all, I think we should actually be celebrating the fact that it looks like the job markets are actually recovering. We can debate to what extent they've actually recovered or not, but I think.
But that's more of a cyclical thing from the
well,
downturns.
it's a cyclical thing, but but the good news is it's recovering. But I think we know that the character of work and the nature of work is going to be quite different in the next few years. So I'm going to at least put some markers down of things that we might come back to that I think are different, that are going on. The first one is what I'll describe as the macros are different. What I mean by that is that we know that one of the things that's quite remarkable is if you took a 100-year history and you looked at, for example, how GDP has grown, and you'd find that jobs have pretty much tracked GDP for the most part, except that roughly about 20, 25 years ago, the two started to get decoupled to where you could get GDP growth and not quite as much job growth. So that's an important dynamic going on. We also know that, for example, most of the net new jobs that have occurred have really happened in two places: what I'll call the non-market sector, so healthcare, education, and so on, and services is where all the net new jobs are. So I think that's a reality. As much as we like to talk about other areas like manufacturing, some of the net new jobs have been in those areas. By the way, that's true also of most advanced economies, and increasingly the case for even emerging countries, by the way, except maybe for China, where they've had manufacturing grow. We also know that, for example, there's been wage stagnation. So you've got some of these sort of macros going on. So that's point number one. The second thing is, I think we now have the specter of, call it technology-induced unemployment. So this is the thought that we could have, robotics and automation, and Rodney, I'm sure, will talk some more about this and we'll get into it. But this is the time when we're starting to see this, by the way. And there's actually a great sort of Keynes quote going back to 1930, where he basically said, we're going to have a new disease. This is technological unemployment, where in fact our ability to optimize and come up with ways to use labor efficiently may actually outrun our ability to find things for labor to do. And we can debate whether we're there yet or not. I'm sure we'll have a fun discussion about that. The third thing that's going on is, I think, the nature of the kinds of skills that are required and the returns to skills is actually changing quite significantly. We know that, for example, there are huge returns now to highly skilled and highly educated people. We see that in the wage data, we see that in the job market. Those markets are almost always tight, and in fact, even in this last recession, most people at that end of the spectrum didn't really experience that much unemployment. So we know that there are returns to skills. We also know that at the other end of the spectrum, there's been a lot of work available for the low-skilled. We can debate whether the wages have been attractive, but if you're working in healthcare, doing care work, that work has actually been available for the most part. So we know that the middle of the curve has been hollowed out, if you like. So the middle skill categories have suffered a lot of downturns in terms of jobs and returns to work. So we've got that going on. And then you've got the other phenomena that are called the 1099 or the W-2 phenomenon. That's just a way to try and encapsulate the fact that we have now many more varieties of work: full-time work, part-time work, contingent work that shows up as W-2s or as 1099s. There's so many more varieties that are now happening at scale. Now, of course, there's always been part-time work and 1099-like work, but not at the scale that we seem to now have it, where people can actually live their entire careers there. And then finally, I'll just mention digitization. And what I mean by digitization is not so much automation as much as the fact that we now have digitized labor markets where we can search for supply, match supply and demand, find out what skills are out there, find out what profiles are available, do some interesting matching, maybe even find out more than just skills, but also traits and reputations, some of which are portable, can lead to employment markets. So these are all some of the things that are starting to happen. I think they're going to shape what happens with work in quite profound ways. I'm sure we'll come back to some of these pieces.
Great. Well, Rodney, why don't we talk a bit about artificial intelligence and that perceived threat that's out there. And I think it feels like this is a moment where machine learning is getting to the level where a lot of repetitive sort of service jobs could be destroyed. And AI is getting a lot of bad press at the moment. I mean, you've had Elon Musk say this is potentially the biggest existential threat to humanity. Bill Gates worrying about that, saying, I agree with Elon. And even Stephen Hawking worrying about this. So what's going on? How worried should we be?
I don't think we need to be as worried as they say. One of my co-founders of an earlier company said the other day, AI is always a complete failure or about to destroy us, and nothing in between. And I think it's probably something in between. Deep learning is a new thing that's sort of snuck up on the world over the last just 3 years. And the capabilities that deep learning has given many AI systems has been surprising. I think people like Elon, Bill Gates, et cetera, make a mistake, though, an honest mistake, in the sense of the following. If a person is really good at some task, they're also good at lots of adjacencies. But these algorithms are not. So if we go back to Deep Blue, which beat Kasparov, beat the world chess champion, it played better than any human had ever played, but it couldn't play tic-tac-toe. Now find me a chess master who can't play tic-tac-toe and win. Likewise, a chess master can teach another person to play chess, whereas Deep Blue could just say, that's a good move, that's a bad move, and just be a sparring partner.
So how much of the work that we see out there today being done by the middle classes in service industries is like playing either tic-tac-toe or chess, and how much is involving your ability to go across the two disciplines?
If you narrow it down to a very specialized thing, and the example that's really got people's attention in the last few weeks is Google being able to label an image in English and say what's in the image. Now, if a person could do that, they could do all sorts of things. If they say this is someone playing with a frisbee, they could also say where the person is and where the frisbee is. These systems can't. But that gives a capability, whereas before Google was thinking they were going to have to get hundreds of thousands of people, like the Amazon Turk service, to label images for them. They no longer have to do that. The system works well enough that it can label images, so you can now search images. But it was a very narrowly focused task with a lot of work going into it. So each narrowly focused task, many narrowly focused tasks can be replaced by a program, but not all. And if I could give an example of, who here has heard of Kiva Systems, which was bought by Amazon? So Kiva Systems is a robotics company in Massachusetts for fulfillment. Used to provide fulfillment robotic systems for everyone, and then Amazon bought them and is keeping them all to themselves. And what Kiva did was partition the work of a typical fulfillment worker into what a robot could do and what a robot couldn't do. So fulfillment workers in warehouses would go up and down lines and lines of shelves and pick out the items for the order and then pack them into a box and ship them out. What the Kiva founders realized was going up and down in a straight line is pretty easy to do. We can get a robot to do that. We can't get a robot to reach in and pick out the individual book or the individual bottle of water or whatever it is from the packing. So what they did was they have the person who's good at dexterity sitting there, and the robots bring the shelves to them. So if you look at it, there's this person sitting there, there's a shelf in front, a light goes on, they reach in, they do the dexterous pick and the pack, and then they look up and there's a different shelf there, and a light comes on and they go and reach for that item. So they partitioned what a person could do and a robot couldn't do, and what a robot could do easily. And I think we're going to see more and more jobs like that, partitioning of things that are repetitive and dull, let the machines do those, and make the pickers in this case, more productive.
And how much of the work that is being done at the moment do you think is capable of being segmented, unbundled in that way?
Well, that's why I was recommending coding, because I think that sort of thinking about all the different pieces that come together is not a narrow function, and that's where humans are going to be better than machines for at least the next 50 years.
Yeah, because Elon Musk is worried that the machine will start writing code that allows it to take over the human race and make us all its slaves.
Yeah, and right now we don't have any program that can write a 10-line piece of code, so I'm not worried that that's going to happen suddenly.
Now, Dai, I mean, you mentioned this segmentation between people who are analytical and people who are basically physical skills and so forth. I mean, my sense, though, is that fundamentally we're moving into this world of winner-takes-all markets, and the people who have the analytical skills are probably going to, and a few footballers and whatever movie stars are going to make a lot of money. But even with the demographics of the baby boom, if you're working in care work, it's just not going to be a very well-paid job. Am I wrong in thinking that?
I think there's something fundamental that you're missing about this picture. And I love talking, Rodney, this was such a good introduction because you're right. everybody is so fearful about turning their entire jobs and turning all of these roles into mechanical roles, and we're all going to be replaced. But I think the truth of the matter is, when we have an introduction of a technology, even a screaming, successfully, well-managed technology, think about the lag time between the introduction of the technology and the implementation. 2 months, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, closer to 20 or 30 years. And I think that's one of the things that's really slow. And we have to wonder, why does it take so long? Right? We brought up the example talking about things that we see every single day. When we go grocery shopping, we say, look, we're dealing with technology from the 1950s. Right? There's somebody that walks around and fills all the shopping carts and someone that fills the shelves. Why does it take us so long? I think it's because, and this is a big problem for the labor market, the way that companies have been managed, they have the new workers that come in, the young workers, and those workers in your dad's environment would work for 30 years. Young people would be trained, have a long time, longevity at the firm, and have the opportunity to work their way up, right? So junior management became middle management, and then everybody was getting ready to take over the leadership roles. Conversely, technology grew at such a fast pace that now, it takes so long. Nobody in middle management wants to implement the technology changes because that eliminates those roles, right, and gives them to the new skills. And you talked a lot about getting those new skills. We talked about how would you counsel your kids. About 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to speak at a commencement ceremony, and I couldn't help but think to myself, what job should I tell these people to go for? Like, what's going to be around? It's so fun to do. Walk around over the course of the next week and ask yourself, what job that I see today is still going to be here in 30 years? And then think about why these jobs still exist. Do we really need cashiers scanning these codes? Right? Do we need that job? I think there are a lot of different roles and different changes that are going to dramatically start to change the world over the next 10 years. And it's exactly like you said, the shift from the W-2 to the 1099 environment. Right?
Yeah.
No,
Well, I was going to pick up on something that my colleagues have both said, which is what I find interesting about what Rodney just described is this sort of bifurcation, right? You've got on the one end of the spectrum these highly specialized, narrow skills, Watson playing chess, and you can imagine robots taking over that and automating that. You've got the other end of the spectrum where things that robots don't do as well, at least not anytime soon, which is all the high dexterity, physical activities. If you then match that up to the job market, it's actually interesting, right? So the high dexterity tends to go with a lot of care work, service sector work, non-market work that we do. Now, if you're asking the question about jobs or wages, you get two different answers, right? So in the case where you've got the high dexterity physical work, there's also a very large supply of people who could potentially do that work. So in labor market dynamics, the wages may end up being much lower. Whereas at the end of the spectrum, where you do really require this incredible agility and insights and thoughtful and adjacency work, there aren't that many people like that, so the wages will go high. So what suffers in all of this is the middle, where the middle looks like it's middle skilled people that are doing highly repetitive tasks. And by the way, most analyses, and we've done some of this and others have done too, would suggest that you're talking anywhere close to 40%, at least of the American workforce, is in that middle category. That's why this is concerning.
I mean, a lot of it does come down to this question of speed, because if you take the long view of the economy, 100 years ago in America, most people were still working in farms, and now it's, 2-3%, and probably would be much lower if the power of the farming lobby wasn't so strong. We managed that transition. No one thinks if only we'd saved all those farming jobs. But what seems to be different about this time is this belief that the combination of globalization and technological innovation is just going to move so fast that maybe eventually we'll return to kind of full employment, but maybe actually we won't, because by the time things have settled down, we'll have just got used to most people not working.
Well, I think the big difference, though, is the pace of change. If you look at previous generations, most of the changes that occurred, arguably similar changes, took multiple lifetimes, multiple work lifetimes before those played into effect. We've seen a lot of these changes happen within a single work lifetime. I mean, Rodney, you were given the example of your dad. You should probably
Since this is not your father's job is the title of the session, my father retired at age 60, doing exactly the same technical job that he did at age 22, which was maintain relay-based telephone exchanges. He didn't want this new stuff of being able to dial interstate that was coming, but for 38 years, he was able to maintain a technical job that didn't change. I think it's very hard to see a technical job lasting that long now.
Now, Jane, I mean, do you think the sharing economy is going to save us? Because, I mean, I listened to Travis from Uber give a very motivational speech the other week where he said basically they're going to create 50,000 new jobs in driving cars, I guess, before the driverless cars take over. But anyway, in the short term, there was going to be...
They just make a deal with CMU last week.
But I mean, this notion of the sharing economy, which I don't like as a phrase, but I mean, this on-demand, the Airbnbs, the doing work on Etsy and selling on these marketplaces. I mean, do they offer a solution to the current jobs crisis? I mean, maybe you go first, James.
Well, I think we need to make a distinction between whether we're solving for jobs or for income. I think one of the things that I think the so-called sharing economy does, I think it expands the possibilities of income and potentially gives people many more choices for income. So it is in that sense, and it also I think tackles, because keep in mind it's not just Ubers and Airbnb. We also have TaskRabbit and all these other versions of this that are tapping into either people who have the time to do certain tasks. So in other words, if these things engage more people and provide more matching opportunities for things that need to be done at a time when they need to be done by people with the right profile or time, I think that's a good thing. Now, the challenge with all of this is at least as an income question, is will these ever pay enough? And also, is there a way to smooth out, if you like, the incomes from these in a way that traditional jobs have done? Now, don't know, but keep in mind that one of the things that traditional jobs have also done, by the way, which may be one of the things that's changing, they bundled lots of things all in one package. They bundled, income. They bundled a sense of self-worth. They bundled kind of meaning and purpose. They combined something that you went to that had stability. They bundled all of that. These other income opportunities, if I could call them that, because they may not be called jobs, don't look like that. So are we creating more challenges when we go to this world of the Ubers, the Airbnbs? Don't know.
I think there's another issue that we have to talk about that it relates directly to the bundling. One of the key problems that a lot of longer-term companies are facing right now is that their elder employees have not saved enough money to retire. And as a result, they are working longer and longer in hopes of saving or having enough that they can live a comfortable retirement life. Well, in this new 1099 environment, you don't even have access to a 401k, right? So I think,
or loans.
Or loans,
right?
or lots of other benefits, right? So one of the things that's really important is I think we as a society have to think about this secondary issue of helping people think through clearly how and when to begin preparing for retirement. And not only preparing for retirement, but how to spend money in retirement years. I think a lot of people are working longer than they necessarily have to. The number one message I like to give young people is save now or die trying.
But I mean, it's interesting to see in policy circles that this notion that maybe the thing the state has to do in response to a coming jobs crisis is to separate this question of income from purpose and how you spend your time by basically paying a minimum guaranteed income to everybody and just saying, look, let's give everyone a basic amount of money each week so that they can get the basics to live on. And then, you can spend all your time doing plays or whatever else you want, inventing code or whatever. But actually, society is able, with relatively few people actually doing onerous work, to look after all its needs. So why don't we be a bit more utopian about this and put in place a new kind of minimum guaranteed living wage? What do you think about that, Jane? You don't like it, Di, I can see.
I'm thinking, God, I can't think of a better recipe for killing innovation.
Jane?
I would agree with that, but I'd also add something else, which is, at some level, after all, this is an Economist conference, right? At some level, economies need consumption, to drive GDP growth. Economies such as ours in particular rely on household and consumer spending to drive most of the economic growth. So in that world, there's a fundamental question, which is, how do we make sure, therefore, that we have enough people with enough income to be able to spend to drive the kind of GDP growth that we need? I think so. You then have to square that with the fact that you don't want to kill innovation.
Right.
You don't want to have people just essentially be, sitting and not do anything. And I wonder whether there's some middle ground there that has to do with thinking through what are all the other tasks that we care about in society that don't get done, and could we reward people by doing some of the things that really need doing? We know we underpay teachers. We know there's a lot of care for the elderly that's required. We know that all these tasks that are required, why not, in fact, as opposed to just pay people for doing nothing, why not at least encourage them to do those things that we care about?
Do you have any reaction to any of this, Rodney? What do you think?
Well, yeah. My reaction is that, people are actually quite smart. All people are smart, and they figure out how to use these, and they use them and start to use them in creative ways, and new apps come along. I think in a lot of our industries, we have relied on separating the people who are allowed to be smart and the people who are not allowed to be smart, and so in my own industry of manufacturing, equipment is really hard to use, and you have to be trained to use it. What we're doing in my company is trying to take the sensibility of these devices to the factory floor so that the factory workers can now use their problem-solving skills. They don't have to be highly trained. Everyone has problem-solving skills, and they can actually become a higher level in what they're doing in the task. But it's easy to see how to motivate that in this, because you want to sell lots of these. It's more a structural change in having respect for how you can get more out of workers by giving them tools that they can be challenged by and rise to the occasion. And that's a different way of thinking, and I don't know how to set the incentives to make that work worldwide.
Okay, let's take 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Who'd like to go first? Someone at the back there. Please say who you are.
Thank you, Jesse Sandoval. Question on implications for state tax revenue given changes in wage structure and the evolution of wages, because it seems to me that our tax systems are predicated on these old labor models, and if we assume that maybe 40% of the population will be 1099, what are the implications for our tax systems?
We've got another question as well. Let's take a couple while we're at it. Anyone else? I believe you must all have had a good lunch, I can see, and there must be some more questions about the future of work out here.
Well, while people
Okay, why don't
think
you
about
answer the tax
questions, maybe we could touch on that one for a minute, because I think I am the token CPA on the panel, but don't hold that against me. I'm still fun at cocktail parties. So you're right, the tax implications are tremendous in this 1099 environment. A lot of the incentives that are set up right now are exclusively set up in the W-2 arena. Everything from getting transportation tax so that you get your metro commute, you have all of this deductibility. The other thing that's really important is in a 1099 environment, you're able to deduct a lot more things than you are in a W-2 environment. So believe me, people play this game both ways. So one of the outcomes of people shifting from a W-2 to multiple 1099s is the rising boom in tax preparation. And one of the things that's kind of key is we have all kinds of technology that's now being purchased by small contractors, in spite of the fact that they had a lifetime on W-2s. They're going, I can buy a new iPad, a new iPhone, I can buy all this stuff and it's immediately deductible. What a win, right? So we see all these implications that are happening right now. I think that one of the biggest issues is states are not going to receive as much tax as they did when people were on a W-2 system. Now the issue here is not really goods or services. The biggest liability that state and local governments have are their underfunded pension plans. So again, I think that this is yet another bullet in what I call the S&L crisis 2.0, where this time S&L stands for state and local. Right?
Okay, we got any more questions? They're over in the front here.
Hello. So in the younger generations, I guess the millennials, there's this notion that everyone has to be special and unique. And it seems like, which, I guess I'm part of that generation. So a lot of my friends try to pursue degrees in things that are not applicable and inevitably wind up moving back in with their parents. Do you think that's something to discourage, and how would you?
Yes.
Agreed. So how?
No, finish your question.
Well, that's pretty much it. How do you, as we move towards this, market where 30 years from now you won't have a lot of these lower entry jobs, how do you motivate someone to actually pursue something where they can add to society and innovate?
And there is this sense that the education system is there a huge education bubble of people getting deeply into debt to get qualifications that are completely useless, liberal arts or whatever. I mean, that's the sort of standard critique. I mean, Di, what do you?
I feel very strongly that there are several fundamental problems with the education system, and they can all be solved at your household level. So first, when we developed this system of the K through 12 system, we're all familiar with this, right? K through 12, we all go through it. The average lifespan was what? Let's be generous, 60. So a large percentage of your life was spent in schooling that was paid for by the government. Now we're all living to what, 65? And we still think K through 12 is applicable? So that doesn't make much sense to me. I think we need to extend the time frame. The number two problem is we have this philosophy. This is the one you can help at home with. We all think that when you get your master's or PhD, right, you come home, you're all done. What happens at the graduation ceremony? You check the list, education, done. And what happens in 10 years from now when all of those skill sets necessary to earn a decent wage are gone, right? So people need to go back and retool. I cannot tell you how important it is for somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to have an encore presentation at a university. Refresh your skills. That's really key. And then the third thing I think is so important is, people come to me all the time and they say, oh, should I borrow to go to school? It's so hot, it's going to be so expensive. What should I do? I think we're seeing, yes, red hot jobs data, absolutely, hands down. But we are also seeing an increase in unemployment. And where are we seeing it? In people with 2-year degrees and less, right? So people that don't have 4-year degrees, like high school, that kind of thing, their unemployment is actually rising. So I think that's really important. I keep telling people what you need to do is go to the bank, borrow, get to school, and then beginning your senior year, just pray for inflation. Pay back with lower dollars, right?
Yeah, I think one thing I would add to that, I think on the question of education, I think it's important to keep in mind some facts. One of the striking things is the fact that something like, at least in the US, 40% of people who start the college don't actually graduate. And there's an incredibly high correlation, if you look at the work that Michael Crow and others have been doing at University of Arizona and so forth, that shows that, in fact, there's a strong correlation between outcomes, both in terms of wages and income, to just literally completing your college education. So that's why I'm actually quite excited about some of the things that some companies are trying to do quite innovatively. If you've seen, some of you may have read, for example, what Howard Schultz at Starbucks is doing with Arizona State University, just to help people complete their education. So I think there's something about, so I think while there's a motivation question, I think there's a whole group of people who are not in this room for whom I think it's important that they actually complete their education, because it has a huge impact. The other thing is also, which I'm excited about, which touches back on this digitization of labor markets, is that we now will have, and are starting to have, better signaling systems. So it's actually now possible to go, whether it's LinkedIn or any of these places, to find out what are the most searched jobs, what are people hiring for what. So the digitization of labor markets is also a good thing in terms of creating the right information signals that actually I think can help people who are trying to think about jobs. By the way, as a side note, one of the side benefits of all the digitization and social platforms is that it turns out that people actually lie a lot less on the resumes that they put on these social platforms than what they put in their applications to companies for jobs, simply because they know lots of other people are going to see these profiles that they put on any of these social platforms. So I think we're also getting some truth coming out of the digitization of labor markets too.
So our theme is the role of the state and balancing government with growth. What more do we want from government to get ahead of these issues and actually provide some useful input, or should government just get even more out of the way?
Well, if Milton Friedman were here, we know what he would pick.
Right.
I mean, the government, the government has a very small role in this, but to the extent that they do, they need to align incentives with what's really going to help us. Why not find the industries that pay well, where there are needs right now, and provide an incentive for when people graduate, then they get their tax credit, rather than just giving them a check now.
Yeah, I'm actually with Jen in the sense that I think, I like it when governments create incentives as opposed to guarantees, right? I think anytime there are incentives in the system to get the outcomes, that's always going to be better than any guarantee of anything. But I think there is a real question, which is, how does policymaking keep up with some of these fundamental changes we're talking about? I mean, I think it's still stuck in a different labor market environment than the one that we're experiencing now. There's a little bit of catch up, I think, that policymakers need to do.
So if you had to say prioritize a particular area, what would you say to the government at the moment? Where should they focus on upgrading the policy framework?
Well, I think it's around the kinds of incentives that recognize that there are different work varieties now in the workplaces, the 1099, the W-2 phenomenon. I think it's recognizing that, so therefore put in place the right infrastructure and enablers for that. I think it's also creating incentives for the right signaling systems to happen between educational institutions, community colleges and whatever have you, with the employers and the companies. I think it's remarkable that people like Howard Schultz at Starbucks is doing what he's doing. I think it'd be great if that was more encouraged and incented for more companies to do those kinds of things. I think that'd be a good thing to have happen.
Rodney.
And I'd just like to pick up on something that both James and Diane talked about. You said that 40% of people don't finish the degree, and you said how important it is to finish the degree. There is also a high correlation between low income and not finishing the degree. So in terms of what can government do, I don't know the exact mechanism, but the biggest impact would be helping finding some way so that low-income people can finish their degree. That's going to be very important, and narrow that divide that is just getting worse and worse.
So we're pretty much out of time. I just want to ask each of you to make a prediction for us about this 18-year-old that we were giving advice to at the start of the panel. How many jobs do you think they're going to have during their lifetime? Rodney?
Well, based on my 4 children, who none of them has had a job for more than 2 years, and they're in their late 20s and 30s, and they're all very successful. So I think that's going to be their pattern for the rest of their life. They're going to be doing thing after thing. So I think they're going to have 30 or 40 jobs over the time of their life.
Di?
I'm hoping over 100. And I hope at least 20% of them are businesses that they start and fail. Because I think there's a tremendous learning experience there that can bring value to every subsequent role.
James?
I tend
You're
to...
a McKinsey. I mean, you must advocate for a long career in one place.
No, I actually advocate for long varied careers. So any context that allows you to change what you do 3 or 4 times in 3 or 4 years, I think is a good environment. Whether you do that in the same company or in different companies, I think I worry a lot about the idea of narrow, deep specialization in an unchanging category for a long period of time. I think those will go away pretty soon.
Well, you think a large number of jobs is going to be the norm?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Triple digits, right?
Well, great. Well, thank you, all 3 of you, for a really stimulating panel discussion.